So, all right, it is, yes, 3 past 11 from my watch. I will switch off my webcam in a second because the internet connection I have today is unfortunately not very stable. So I want to not get or not pull too much bandwidth off the webcam. So I will switch it off, but in the end, when we ask and answer the questions, I will put it back on again. Welcome everybody to this wonderful webinar at this sunny day. At least here it is sunny. I hope you're all fine. My name is Alexander Greb. I'm the customer advisory lead. I'm the vice president and global practice lead at Westernacher Consulting for Intelligent Enterprise. Just short introduction. That's why I still said out of pure because I used to a customer advisory lead. I'm at Westernacher since 2 months now. I have a past at SAP. I was there for like 12 years, being the customer advisory lead for S4HANA in Europe. So I have quite a past there. Concerning S4HANA, I was at that time started with being the first project manager of an S4HANA implementation. And after that, I became what we may call the, let's say, chief S4HANA explainer. And this is more or less the reason why we talk today about the best practices of best-in-class S4HANA adopters, because what I learned in those more or less 6 years since S4HANA is now available, since S4HANA is introduced, is that even if sometimes SAP and also SAP partners try to give a little bit the impression that digitalization can be an on-off switch by implementing, for example, a next-gen ERP suite like S4HANA, what I've learned is definitely not the case. You have to be very clear that there are things you can do right and there are things you can do wrong. And it depends on, let's say, choosing the right best practices and approach. If your success, not only the project, but if your success in the end is larger or smaller. And if you look at customers of SAP who have already implemented S4HANA and you look at those who are now after this real digital champions because they do different things than before and they do it digitalized and look in contrast to other customers, and they are there, whose value they have gained out of S4HANA is not that much and who are not doing different things and who have become not so much better after this. Those two sides and those two parties have things in common. So it is very clear, and we have to be clear, that when that those people who came out better off did certain things right, which other didn't. And we want to discuss today what these things are and what from my experience these are. And I'm really interested in your questions and your discussion points in the end. So please feel free to enter your questions in the question poll on the right side of your screen. I'm looking forward to answer it. But at first, let's start with the points. Let's start with the webinar about the best practices of best-in-class adopters. And well, I think in the last 18 months, we all again have been shown that digitalization matters. And there are things that if you have these kinds of capabilities, you have been probably better off in the last 18 months than before. And when looking at the approach, and we said digitalization is not an on-off switch, you are definitely not digitalized if you choose to use a certain software, if you choose to implement a next-gen ERP, if you choose to implement S4HANA. That alone does not make you digitalized, because it's a little bit much more. What I really see is that really nice example on the right side, because it's really sympathetic, in my opinion. It's really nice because it is about a German sports club who obviously, because of Corona, said we have to have our member meetings virtually, but because we cannot do it physically. What did they do? They copied the whole team links into a local newspaper. And I'm quite sure that by copying that link, not even using any link shortener or anything, that probably made that nobody was attending that meeting at all. So we see if we do not if we do not get something of a digital mindset, which helps us to encompass the whole process into our action. What does it mean being digital? The result we have there and the result we will find is definitely subpar. And this comes very clear, and I have two examples here from my past, which were quite interesting because it shows quite obvious that there are, if you have certain different approaches, the outcomes are absolutely different. One example from my past, for example, was a consumer goods company. And the first contact between SAP and the customer IT was already in 2016. The customer was quite interested in S4HANA. And SAP did at that time what they can do best, like unload on the customer, unload everything what they have in discovery workshops. Customer IT started a POC on a Hex Sandbox in the end of 2016, inclusive RI calculation, inclusive comparison to their ECC system. And they were still not finished in 2018. So it took like over 2.5 years were spent, and in that case also in a certain way wasted by not really asking the right questions. And it was not in that time that there were some scope issues, because of course, yes, S4HANA was quite young there, and it has less scope than it has today. That was not the case in that point, that this was an issue. It was really purely an issue of the approach. And the customer had no really image there. The customer did not really see what is my case for S4HANA, even after those 2.5 years. And what happened, of course, he started then a migration, but after like 12 months, he was on S4HANA, but he just leveraged super values. The GUI were the same, the processes were the same. And I talked then to the CIO. I was not really involved in that case, but I talked to the CIO. That's why I've learned from that case. And he said, when he was talking about his experience in that aspect, that he now has a problem because he has lost more or less his business. His business says, like, this is supposed to be digitalization. Everything looks the same. Yeah. And that the CIO said, yeah, but we told him we are now on a completely new platform. The feedback was quite clear from business. They said, yeah, maybe that's fine for you, but for us, there's no beef in all of that. So basically, he lost his business in a certain way, and he said, like, after this, he had problems to justify any new digitalization efforts that he was attending. The other example was a chemical company. They had their first contact between the SAP account executive and the customer IT in February 2018. And things were quite different there. The SAP sales team built an individual S4 strategy for the customer. They said, like, do not let us tell or let us talk about what you're doing at the moment, or do not let us not tell about and discuss about what the software is all about. But first, let us tell us about, or let us discuss what your strategy is. Like, what are your issues? What are your topics? What have you learned maybe in the last 2 years of your business, what you need and what the capabilities are that you need? And by doing this, the benefits were discussed in workshops along the customer strategy and the customer business. And the customer was saved a lot of money too, because he did not spend like 2.5 years in any activities concerning trying to find the case. No, he was quite easily convinced, because he saw his case. It was not like discussing about features and functions, but it was discussing how his strategy can be leveraged by using these kinds of things. And the project was started after 3.5 months. The project itself took a bit longer, because since he had that mindset now, we want to do something which really puts the horsepower of our strategy to the street. He did not choose something like lean migration, but he chose a selective approach, where he said, like, no, I do not want to take over anything from the past. I want to leverage the possibilities and the capabilities. So I also want to definitely implement new things. He took a little bit longer. He took 18 months in the implementation, but he fully leveraged digital capabilities. And even after his go live, he had then a program which consequently put every quarter new innovations from the program from S4HANA into his productive system. And the business is really tight in there. They are really included, and they are really convinced that what's happening there is actually good for them. And the money he spent there was definitely better spent than in the left case, where they did not really find or did not really decide to stick their S4HANA initiative to their strategy. So in basic, the reason for these two different outcomes are two completely different mindsets at the approach. And this is, in my opinion, one of the biggest problems that the whole SAP ecosystem has at the moment. I always use a cell phone analogy. What you see here, for example, on the left side is a Sony Ericsson I used in 2005. And it was a really, really nimble little mobile phone. I really liked it because the battery, it lasted for about a week. You could have great phone calls and great quality. You could listen to some music. You could make some photos with it. I was quite happy with it, and this is something more or less where our ECC customers are. They're using their ECC at its max, and they're happy with it. And but what is happening now? Well, we talk about going on the right side. We want to implement together digital technologies, like in that case, the iPhone. And what do you do in your private life when you go from the left side to the right side? When you change, let's say, a more dated, a vintage, a legacy mobile phone and take over a new mobile phone, like the iPhone on the right side? Well, you go into the technology and you fully try to encompass the capabilities of it. Like, for example, location-based services. You take the iPhone and you say, well, great, location-based services. I could use Google Maps. I never get lost again when I'm cycling in the woods, for example. Or if you're a single, location-based services, great, I can use Tinder. So you really come from the purpose side and you come from the capability side and try to use the possibilities of the new technology for you to the max. But that's not how we work and how we function, unfortunately, in our business life, because when you take this picture and you transform it and transport it to how most of the time S/4HANA is approached, we do it completely different. Out of insecurity, the whole SAP ecosystem always is focusing on the left side. They discuss with you how you do your phone calls with the Sony Ericsson, how you enter telephone numbers and so on, just to explain you then how you can continue doing exact the same thing on the right side, on the iPhone. And a value is then discussed with because maybe you can now the connection is now coming in faster because the chip in the iPhone is faster. But this is more or less how it's done. You concentrate on what you are doing at the moment with your legacy technology. And I want to be a little bit provocative because I think in most cases it does not really matter. Why? Because the way you work with legacy technologies, and there's no difference if you take as an example the old mobile phone from 2005 or your ECC system. The way you work in those legacy technologies is not determined because you really want it so, but is determined because the limitations of the old technology does not allow any different way to work with. You did not know any better how you could use this legacy mobile phone, so you did not really know what you missed. So you try to make the best out of it, and by discussing how to bring over, let's say, exactly the same thing on the right side, and this is exactly what happens when you do a migration, is that you're taking the limitations of the old technology to the new technology from 2021 where it does not exist anymore. So we really have to be clear that we have to become in our business life more like we are in our private life. We have to come from the capability side. We have to come from the purpose, what this tool, because it's nothing more than a tool, what this tool called ERP software has to fulfill, and try to get the best out of it. And I will talk with you in the next 30 minutes about how this is accomplished. So we have to be clear. Digitalization and the right approach, and this is very important, is, if you want to put it in a central sentence, is the right approach is not about continuing doing the things you always did in the past, but a bit better because it's a bit faster maybe. But digitalization is all about being able to do things you were not able to do before. And this is done not by transferring everything that you have and that you probably implemented if you're using ECC like 10 to 50, maybe 20 years ago, but looking on your strategy, looking to the capabilities of new technology and take care that you get the most out of it. So we will talk about this, how is this accomplished. And basically, I always say, like, for simplicity reason, there are 5 best practices what these best in class S/4HANA adopters have in common. And the first best practice, to start with our top 5, is definitely they put their strategy in the center. And we already had a little bit of a preview there already in the discussion we had in the slides before, because the first part of this first best practice, definitely have a forward-looking discussion. Discuss about your strategy and the way digitalization can help to achieve it. Digitalization is not about the differences between S/4HANA and ACC. And I know customers who aborted their initiative and started from zero again, like after 3 years, because they were more or less caught in a vortex where they said, like, I have to know every little difference what they may be in the last corner of the application, because it's important for us to know. A CIO of a customer who was a little bit in that kind of trap, he said, when I was talking about his experiences, he said, like, we were becoming paranoid that there may be a difference, and if there is a difference and we do not know about it, it would more or less kill our business, which was definitely not the case. Because when you go from the strategy, like what you need to be able to do, not, let's say, not in the past and not even today, but what your customers are expecting from you in maybe 2 years, or how your business model will evolve in 2 years, or what you learned during the Corona time, like what kind of capabilities you need, because probably the next big disruption, like with climate change and probably politically different laws that are put upon you, you need new capabilities that you did not have before. Then basically it does not matter, because you really have to come from that direction. So do a forward-looking discussion, and internally we have to talk to business C-level about business. This is definitely not an IT topic, and as lots of CIOs agree with me, this is nothing that should be treated as an IT topic only, and we'll see in a minute why. Because the moment when we talk about the strategy, really need the buy-in of the CFOs and CEOs. And that's something that really helps any project and any approach, if we have the interest and we have the buy-in of these roles in the progress. And definitely keep it simple, avoid self-made complications. Quite often the SAP and partner environment have packaged solutions that kickstart your digitalization initiative, that really put the, let's say, the big bull into smaller sizes and help you, like, to make this kind of huge undertaking, which it looks like in the first view, manageable, because it says very clear, like, and we will talk about in a minute about these kinds of possibilities, like divide between commodity processes and differentiating processes, and then put the commodity processes in the cloud, and we concentrate on the differentiating process. So you really have possibilities there to do things simple, to automate things, to leverage it. And that's why the third way really was keep it simple, avoid self-made complications. Those who had a very clear picture about for themselves how to go on why they should go to S/4HANA, and then did it, they really made it clear that for them, they concentrated on 2 to 3 reasons to do that. And that was what guided them. They did not do something like an ROI over the whole area because they were feeling safer, because they could justify them. No, they said, like, I want to concentrate on 2 to 3 strategic points. These are my anchors, and they are guiding me in my approach. And what comes out of it? And I'm quite often amused when the transformation or the transition scenario discussion comes. It makes a difference what you choose to do. And you have to be clear that even if you take something like a technical version, so the classical brownfield approach, or a greenfield, or the blue, pink, whatever field, the selective transition, everybody has a different name about it. It does matter, because you will have different results it's not that you can choose to go the left way and migration and then do all of these kind of innovation after this. Of course, you can approach a topic like this, but you will have different results than if you choose another way to go, like a greenfield or a bluefield. It's not like any one is better or worse, but you have to be very aware and very clear that these three options that you have different results. And it depends on your situation and what you have, what kind of goals and strategies you have to choose it. The worst thing that you can do is to rely on bad feelings from experiences in the past. I quite often got greeted by customers like, my name is XYZ, I'm a brownfield customer. That's before they even started to discuss how they should approach the topic. They said, I remember 20 years ago, we made something like a new implementation, and it took like 1.5 years blueprinting until we had the first version that we could look into, and this was huge and expensive. No, we will not do that. You really should spend certain time to look at what is your situation and how you should approach it, because you have to be very clear. If you choose that you want to make a migration, a technical conversion, then indeed this kind of discussion is quite heavily laid on the IT side. The discussion you are doing there is technical, spends are costs. So probably your peers and your stakeholders will expect an ROI from you and a business case calculation. Which in that area is even easier to do, because of course you do the technical conversion from A to B, but the scope remains the same, so you have something to compare. But the more you go on the right side, the more you're talking about going the strategic way, talking about strategy, talking about the capabilities that you expect from that solution. Of course, the discussion goes and turns to be more strategic. So the spends you are having in that case are investments, and investments are different budgets than costs. So that also will have an effect on your internal discussion concerning your initiative. Yeah, it does not mean that you have to throw everything away and do that revolutionary greenfield path. You can be much more in the middle and in the selective, which is a highly attractive approach in my opinion, because it's the best of both worlds, where you can say like, okay, I will take some things over from my ECC system, because there are areas which are something I probably would do the same anyway. But there are certain areas where I really want to fully leverage the possibility of digitalization. And that's where I do some things new. So this is these kinds of things can really change the way you approach this topic and change the way you get results out of it. So whenever you say you approach an S4HANA initiative and you're starting with it, please always do an analysis and a clear discussion about what this is supposed to be for you. If you want to find, of course, that transition and do that discussion, there's a best practice approach to find the right transition mode. And that's why what I did and do always with my customer. I say, like, before we talk about what we do in that aspect, let's do an exercise. And the exercise is we will lie a process map and we divide between commodity and differentiating processes. Why? Because commodity process is quite clear. Those are the processes where you are no different than any other company, like where Daimler, for example, is working not different than SAP or a mid-sized companies. And those processes, for example, yes, they are human resources, for example, or travel accounting, or for many companies also it's finance, yeah, where they say that's for me a commodity processes. That's something you really do not want to invent the wheel again, because other people have already made quite good content concerning that, and you can of course profit from best practices who are already available within software. So you want to consume those commodity processes basically as a service, and the best way to consume services is of course from the cloud. So this is something then we can already use to reduce our scope. And then we of course left with the differentiating processes, and the differentiating processes, they are really where the beef is. They are where the customer decides if he buys from you and not from your competition. And of course, those are also the processes in most of the cases, the top line processes, where the company strategy is more or less taking grip on. So you should, of course, then mirror your company strategy on the differentiating processes. What does your company or strategy or your competition strategy tell you about them? Where you have to go, what you have to be able to do, what are the goals in that area? But you also have to attack these kind of processes from another side, like from the innovation possibilities driven by technology like S4HANA. Like what kind of capabilities are put on the table by the technology, which may not be rooted in the strategy, but of course helps your strategy to really fully gain speed. So you should, like I said, discuss your differentiating process from two sides, from your strategy on the one side and from your from the technology from the other side. And by this, you gain something like an innovation list. And the innovation list is nothing more than a to-do list of things you really want to have after you implement it, like where you want to be better, like things you want to be able to do. And then you take this kind of innovation list and you put it on a time frame. And the time frame has three certain areas. And there's a short-term time frame, a mid-term time frame, and a long-term time frame. The short-term time frame is maybe year one, like your project runtime, and mid-term time frame is like the year after go live, and everything after this is a long-term time frame. And you then put the points of the innovation lists under the area of this time scale, depending on what kind of priority you give them. Like the things you think that is very urgent because it's very urgent maybe for your strategy or for other reasons. Of course, this is then put under short-term time frame. There are other topics who are midterm and other topics who are probably more long-term time frame. Like for example, things like the digital boardroom. Beautiful thing, but this is nothing you implement within a year if you go on to this. So this is a typical long-term time frame capability. And then you have a very clear picture what you are. Because if you find that the list, for example, under the short-term time frame is the longest, then you're probably not a migration customer, because there are obviously things you really need urgently immediately after go live. So probably your ECC system or your ERP system does not really match your business model anymore, or you have very strong external pressure on you from the market or like from other external factors that means that you need new things. So if you see a lot of things on your innovation list on the left side, you obviously need more than just a migration. Probably you are then a greenfield customer or a selective customer. On the other hand, if you have most of the things on the midterm or long-term time frame, then probably the benefits you can get out of it are not really on the short-term note, but more on the mid or long-term note. So in that case, a migration can be a way to go for you. So all what I want to say for you in that aspect is that please be aware, it's not like you are automatically a greenfield or a brownfield or whatever customer. Use the time for a thorough analysis and use models like these and approach us. We will help you with that to find the right way to go, which guarantees you that you really get the horsepower of the solution to the street. Because there are so many customers who did not do that, who are now in S4, and you really find out that you are on S4 if you go into the settings and then you find maybe somewhere that it is an S4HANA solution that you're running. From like looking at the vintage GUIs that you're still using, you cannot tell this. And this is where I say definitely an opportunity. Good. Next topic was that we were discussing about how we can approach from the downside. Of course, company strategy, the capability-based approach, what is that? Because we, of course, have to find this glue of company strategy on one hand and the SAP solution on the other side. SAP quite often tried something which did not really help, because if you talk to SAP and many partners, they are coming 100% from the solution side. So they will want to talk with you about features and functions. Yeah, but we know what comes out of it. And I have seen this quite often, that there is a consultant or a pre-seller and he's giving you a beautiful demo and you see the possibilities and the functions there and say, oh, that's great, but still, where's the connection to myself? And probably your colleagues are a little bit nervous because they try to match what they see on the screen to what they're actually working with, and they see, oh, there's a button missing above it. So does this mean that there's something which the solution cannot do? So features and functions and solution discussion is not really a glue and the match and a translator between your situation and the solution. So what you need in the end is what I call a capability-based discussion, because the customer is always, he talks about his situation on the challenges, but naturally the customer is often fixated in his as-is process because he does not know anything else. While the SAP person or the SAP partners, he always talks about features and functions and deployment models and general benefits, and there's no common language happening. And the common language that can help you in that case is a capability-based approach, how I call it. It's quite simple because it just means that you're not talking about the solution in the beginning. So you're doing not that what SAP and what the SAP partner from probably naturally wants to do most. No, you leave the solution out. You first talk about your strategy. You talk about your situation. So the SAP partner should listen to you in this first step. You should not talk. You should listen. And by getting this clear picture, like for example, I had a customer, big German telecommunications provider. You probably know it. It has a certain color. This company struggled for years to find his case because they said, like, we have a huge amount of ERP systems and so on, and trying to find something like a business case, and we do not know where to start. We cannot see the forest because we have so much trees in there. So what we did there was we said, like, let's say we take one area of you where we want to start, and it was the logistics area of that, and then tell us what is your situation and what is your goal. And they said our goal and our strategy is the perfect customer journey. And the perfect customer journey is that he can, for example, order stuff from any situation where he is or within any channel and so on. And by getting the clear picture of his situation, we then define what capabilities does the company need to be able to realize this strategy and to be able to provide the perfect customer journey. And the capabilities were things like, we need total transparency, we need insight to action capabilities, and so on and so on. And by then knowing what kind of capabilities were needed, then an architecture based on SAP applications could then be built, which enables those capabilities, which then, of course, are enabling the customer to fulfill their strategy. So this capability, area, what you have between your strategy in the discussion and the features and functions, are the translator for that. And that's why you should exactly use this kind of discussion. Second best practice we already talked about is definitely divide between commodity processes and different processes. And because the commodity processes, like we said, they are the ones you probably do not want to continue using like you do. And if you know that they are commodity processes, you of course can optimize it. And you optimize them in a way which is completely different to differentiating processes. Because what we can see here from this process automatization chart, like what kind of innovations we can realize in S/4HANA. The commodity processes, they are optimized by best practice and standardization, by automatization. You want cost optimization, then you want to bring the bottom line down. It's different in the differentiating processes. That's where you, like we discussed, where your strategy is happening. There you want to reimagine your business processes probably. You want to introduce new business model. You want to optimize. We want to raise the top line there. So the business model innovation there is transactional. It's not insights and steering and being more efficient, but being more effective. And that's why, because you want to be more effective there, not more efficient, you need different optimization and automatization tools than on the left side. And let's, like we said, making a process map where you differentiating between does not only help us to determine which kind of transition model you should use, but it will also help you later on to find out how and where you can use there during the project intelligent technologies to optimize yourself. Yeah, so you're doing this work with that process map, not just for having one value, but you will get different values out of it through the runtime of your approach and of the project. Definitely, best practice, they lie on architectural map to maximize insight to action. And that's why is that put into it? Because it's, in my opinion, the capability and the innovation that gets the most power out of technology. And I can show you an example. Like, for example, you're producing enterprise, and obviously you're probably using MRP runs. So these kinds of batch runs which are aligning demands and your orders and your stocks and so on, and putting is in order. So how is the process at the moment? The process at the moment is that your planner, for example, comes into his office on a Monday and he sees there his open points and his to-dos and his exception list from his MRP, which is where the MRP who run like on Friday night or on the weekend did not really find a solution because you probably had maybe a material shortage. But you, of course, try to solve the problem. And this means you open maybe new orders or you do something like a reschedulings. But if the solution that you implemented for this problem was successful, you find on the next day out, because you have to run a new MRP run in the next night, because this is needed for you to get a picture if it was successful and to implement it and to make it real. But the problem is we have also customers at SAP, or we had customers at SAP that were already forced to run their MRP on the weekend because they are a global company, had just one ERP, no slot in the night, which was long enough to run it. So they did it on the weekend. So just imagine, any problem you want to solve takes a week until it's not only implemented, but if you want to see if your solution for the problem actually worked. And this is nothing how we can work in the 21st century. That's where we really have to up the game. And insight to action means, in that case, for example, that your planner now with the new MRP run, which has a cockpit, which has a view, is now not left alone. So, but the system recognizes, for example, his problem because it still has exceptions, but it says like, look, I know what's happening. I provide here some solutions for you, some scenarios how you can solve that problem, because I have intelligent technologies in my belly that can help me to identify the business case in that aspect. And the scenarios I prepared for you, for example, here are 2 reschedules and 1 procurement from another vendor for your material shortage. And because I have parameters to give you decision support and to prioritize. I say, for example, the reschedule here got 3 stars. It's a preferable solution and a preferable scenario. And the other reschedules, for example, just get 2 stars because probably it takes longer or costs more money to realize. That means that the planner, he can click on it and can watch and can look into that scenario. But by clicking on choose, the solution that was prepared for him, that was the inside part, is put into action automatically. So another MRP run is run, which is isolated, which puts the solution for this problem into action. You have real-time problem solving in that aspect. And this is really a game changer, because if something is happening, you can then react on a short term and not have to wait like till the next MRP is run. And another example for is what we find here, because it's, in my opinion, even going one way further. And I remember when I was a junior consultant, like 16 years ago, lots of projects I did were stock optimization. So I was given by the customer huge Excels where they imported all their data, where they make the snapshots, and I got all the demands and I got the procurement data. And what I did, of course, was then I went through the material numbers and I calculated based on prospects, like what would be the perfect stock level for them. So was this right or was it wrong what I did? Well, I think it was in a certain way wrong what I did. It was not completely wrong. It was right, but only right for that moment when the snapshot was taken. So something which should be a daily task done by technology was in that case what the consultant made as a project. So you want insight to action, in that case, automated by the system. And that's what's happening now with the demand-driven supply chain management, in the aspect that the system, if you choose to use these kinds of capabilities, checks every morning your demand situation, your procurement situation, your stocks, and gives you, based on this kind of preview, advices should you change your stocks and change your buffers and for example, your security stocks in that aspect. And by clicking on Adapt, you can put this into action immediately. So something which was done in the past by a junior consultant maybe once a year for you, and something what was out of date probably the moment the junior consultant gave you his results, is now something of a process and a workflow which runs every night for you. And this is insight to action, and that's what I mean. Capabilities that the technology gives you and you can use to do things different and not just a bit better. Another topic, of course, is concentrate on tangible and consumable innovation. And that's what I always see when, for example, we find a customer who's running on ECC, which is fine. But then he's presented, of course, the latest top-notch technologies, and SAP is talking or tries to talk with him about blockchain technologies and shows in the digital boardroom in Waldorf and so on. This, of course, everything is quite impressive, but this is not something which is giving him immediate value. And we've seen in our from our innovation list and our phases, we should have ideally already something that is available for the users right after the go live, so they see difference, so they see that things are different now and better. Of course, you also need lighthouse things, yeah, because they guide you and they give you, they can feed your innovation strategy. But we really need to keep a sound balance between inspirational innovation and consumable innovation. And that's why we should use this chart also that we had in the beginning of to balance, let's say, our strategic innovation initiatives when you go to S4, what we want to do when. And the last, of course, balance of efficiency and effectiveness. And this goes into the direction we also discussed in the beginning about this is not an IT topic. Probably any CIO will tell you that he's more or less measured on efficiency. Yeah, and that's the problem what many CIOs have. And that's why also that CDOs, for example, are then put beside them, because the CDO then more or less are then measured on effectiveness and not on efficiency like the CIO quite often. This is why if you really see it as an IT thing and you really limit the benefits of an initiative like that on efficiency, we really have to bring business on the table to make the top line benefits they're working. I know this is not often the case because especially in the SAP environment, SAP ecosystem, the SAP cups and mugs with the SAP logo, they're always standing in the IT department because that's a comfort zone of the SAP ecosystem. Unfortunately, they are never in the business because the SAP ecosystem is not, by far not enough talking to business. And that's exactly what we have to change. We really have to talk with business. We really have to bring both parties at the table because that's what digitalization is all about. And the last one, and then after this, I want to go into the question and answer session, prioritization of core over edge. What does this mean? This means that we have, on the one hand, of course, our core systems, which are our ERP systems, for example, and we have our edge technologies. And edge is quite often the what we can call afterburner for your business. It's like the IoT initiative that you have, or it's like using modern cloud platform technologies to realize mobile cases, and so on. The problem, though, is that quite often, of course, these edge initiatives are highly attractive from an internal promotional point. Like, for example, if a manager wants to put himself great into the spotlight, what he often does, he starts an edge initiative. Like, we will do IoT, or we will show that we are innovative by doing that. Of course, this is quite often marketing related, but the problem is those edge initiatives that do not really help you further if you have on the core side a system and technology is still running, which absolutely cannot work with anything that you win out of this edge initiatives. Like, for example, I drive a BMW, and I have the connected drive package in there. And the connected drive package is quite helpful, but it's also, of course, makes my car in a certain way to a huge data source for BMW, because they have a win out of it, a lot of data they can work with for their, for example, development. Like, they can see like how this car is used and how much stress is put on certain components and so on. And this is something that really can help them to be better in their next car generation. The problem, of course, now is if you generate data out of these kinds of edge project, which then in the end you have no possibilities like to work with. And that's also what was happening in the first years of these kinds of technologies, where the automotive industry clearly said, yeah, we're collecting at the moment. We cannot really work with them, with the data, because we do not have the possibilities yet, but we're collecting it and so on. And this is something that does not really help. At least your core application should be technology-wise at least on the same level as your edge initiatives, so you are able to get benefit out of your edge initiatives. So when you prioritize core over edge, you're not doing it really for core sake, but for edge sake. So I hope we're now 50 minutes in the webinar. We have 10 minutes left. I hope this is something that gave you ideas and probably some, as I hope, good attack points for your initiative. I have not yet any questions in the poll, so if you like, maybe we can open the microphones. I'm happy to hear about your questions now. If you have no questions at the moment, you also, of course, my email address is alexander.greb@westernacher.com. You also can, of course, contact me after this via email, or follow me on LinkedIn, or contact me on LinkedIn. I would be very happy to get and stay in contact with you. But if you have a question now, of course, please don't hesitate to ask it. Thank you very much for taking your time to be with us, and I hope we'll stay in contact definitely. Thank you very much and have a great day. Bye-bye.